Hey, sleepers. Tonight, we're delving into a strange and quiet corner of scientific history. Imagine a laboratory, not a bright, sterile one of today, but a dusty room from a century ago. The air is thick with the scent of old paper and strange chemicals. Outside, the world is roaring with change, a new era of machines and ideas. But in here, a scientist is dreaming of something much older, a secret connection that binds all of life together. He is about to cross a line that no one had dared to cross before. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It helps us continue to bring you these quiet explorations. And while you're there, feel free to share your location and your local time in the comments below. It's always wonderful to see where in the world you're all drifting off from. So close your eyes, take a deep breath, and get ready to drift off as we explore the forbidden experiment of human-ape hybrids. Let us begin our journey not with the chilling experiment itself, but with the man at its center. His name was Ilya Ivanov. He was born in 1870 in the vast and changing Russian Empire. To understand the man, we must first understand his world. Picture the Russia of his childhood. It was a land of immense contrasts, of gilded palaces and humble wooden huts, of deep, soulful spirituality and a rising tide of revolutionary thought. It was the twilight of the Tsars, a time when the old world of emperors and serfs was beginning to creak under the weight of new ideas. And the most powerful of these new ideas was science. Science in the late 19th century felt like a form of magic, a new key that could unlock all the universe's secrets. It was the age of Edison's light bulb, of Pasteur's vaccines, of Marconi's wireless signals. And weaving its way through all of this was the profound and unsettling theory of Charles Darwin. Darwin's idea of evolution was more than a biological theory. It was a philosophical earthquake. It suggested that humanity was not the special, divine centerpiece of creation, but a small twig on a vast, ancient, and endlessly branching tree of life. For a curious young boy like Ilya, growing up in this world, science wasn't just a subject in a textbook. It was a grand adventure, a quest for the true story of where we came from. He was a brilliant and focused student, drawn to the quiet, intricate world of biology. He was fascinated by the fundamental mechanics of life, how it begins, how it passes from one generation to the next. He chose to specialize in a field that was so new, it was almost science fiction at the time: artificial insemination. Now, that's a clinical-sounding phrase, so let's paint a simpler picture. Imagine you are a gardener, and you have one single perfect rose bush that produces the most beautiful, fragrant flowers you have ever seen. But this rose bush is in your garden in Moscow, and you have a friend in Paris who has a very strong, healthy rose bush that is resistant to disease, and you want to combine the beauty of your rose with the strength of your friends. In the old days, this would be impossible. You couldn't move the bush. But what if you could take a tiny, almost invisible speck of pollen, the very essence of your flower, place it in a special container, and send it on the train to Paris? Your friend could then carefully introduce that pollen to their flower, and the resulting seeds would carry the traits of both parents. You would have created a new, beautiful, and strong rose that could not have existed otherwise. This is precisely what Ilya Ivanov learned to do, but on a much grander and more complex scale with animals. His work was meticulous, delicate, and required an almost artistic touch. He spent thousands of hours peering through his brass microscope, studying the tiny swimming cells that carry the spark of life. He learned their secrets, how to keep them alive outside the body, how to preserve them, how to introduce them at the perfect moment to begin a new life. His early work focused on horses. In the early 1900s, horses were the lifeblood of Russia. They were the tractors that plowed the endless fields, the trucks that carried goods to market, and the tanks that powered the Tsar's cavalry. The strength of the nation was, quite literally, horse-powered. Ivanov's breakthroughs in artificial insemination were a national sensation. He could take the genetic material from a single prize-winning stallion, a champion of immense strength and stamina, and use it to father hundreds of foals all across the vast Russian Empire. He was, in essence, democratizing genetics, allowing the qualities of the very best animals to be spread far and wide. This made him a hero. He was not a fringe eccentric. He was a celebrated national scientist. His work brought him fame, government funding, and international recognition. He was a man at the very center of his field, a practical visionary whose work was making a tangible difference. But Ivanov's mind was too restless to be content with simply breeding better horses. He was haunted by the deeper questions Darwin had raised. If a racehorse and a plow horse were both, fundamentally, horses, where did the lines get drawn between different species? He looked at a horse and a donkey. They were so similar. They could even interbreed and produce a mule. This proved they were closely related. The line between them was not a solid wall, but a permeable membrane. This fascinated him. He began to wonder how many other walls in the animal kingdom were also just membranes. To find out, he began a series of remarkable hybridization experiments. This was not considered strange or unethical at the time. It was a legitimate and respected method of biological exploration, a way of mapping the hidden connections in the web of life. He was like a linguistic scholar, trying to find the common root words between two different languages to prove they came from the same ancient source. His most famous success was the creation of a zebroid. He managed to fertilize a female donkey with the sperm of a zebra. Imagine the creature that resulted. It had the sturdy, familiar body and gentle nature of a donkey, an animal of farms and fields. But painted onto its legs and hindquarters were the faint, unmistakable, ghostly stripes of its wild African father. It was a living paradox, a walking, breathing testament to the shared ancestry of these two creatures, separated by continents and millions of years of evolution. The zebroid was a scientific marvel. It was living proof that the neat boxes that humans used to categorize the world, horse, donkey, zebra, were our own inventions, and that nature itself was far more fluid and interconnected. He went on to create other hybrids between different species of antelope, between rats and mice, between various types of cattle. Each success was another bridge built across a biological divide, another confirmation of the grand unifying theory of evolution. His reputation grew. He was a master of creation, a man who could gently nudge the boundaries of nature to reveal its underlying truths. It is absolutely crucial that we hold this image of him in our minds. Ilya Ivanov, a celebrated biologist, the master of animal husbandry, the respected pioneer whose work was published in the world's top scientific journals. He was not a monster. He was not a madman. He was a brilliant and ambitious scientist, driven by a profound curiosity about the nature of life. It is this very respectability, this mainstream success, that makes the next chapter of his life so profoundly shocking. For it was this man, at the peak of his career, who decided to turn his gaze away from the gentle kinship of barnyard animals and towards the most sacred, most terrifying, and most forbidden connection of all, the one that links Homo sapiens to the great apes of the jungle. He was about to take all of his skill, all of his prestige, and all of his formidable ambition, and aim it like a cannon at the very heart of what it means to be human. To comprehend the sheer audacity of Ivanov's next step, we must leave the ordered calm of his laboratory and plunge ourselves into the turbulent, radical, and ideological firestorm that was the Soviet Union in the 1920s. The old Russian Empire was dead, swept away by war and revolution. In its place was a new and radical state, the world's first communist nation, built on a foundation of revolutionary ideas. The leaders of this new state, the Bolsheviks, had a vision that was breathtaking in its scope. They didn't just want to reform a country. They wanted to re-engineer humanity itself. Their great project was the creation of a new Soviet man. This was not just a piece of political propaganda. It was a deeply held, quasi-religious belief. This new human, forged in the crucible of revolution, would be a creature of pure reason and science. They would be liberated from the chains of the past, from the old superstitions and bourgeois moralities that had, in the Bolshevik view, kept humanity in a state of ignorant servitude for millennia. And the strongest, most ancient of these chains, they believed, was religion. To the devoutly atheistic Bolsheviks, religion was a poison. It was the opiate of the masses, a tool used by the old order of tsars and aristocrats to control the population with promises of a fictional afterlife and threats of a fictional hell. At the very core of Christianity and other major religions was the concept of human exceptionalism, the belief that human beings are a special creation, made in the image of God, endowed with an immortal soul that separates us entirely from the world of brute animals. This idea was a direct and existential threat to the official philosophy of the Soviet state, dialectical materialism. The name sounds complex, but the idea behind it is quite simple. Materialism is the belief that the only thing that exists is the physical world, matter, and energy. Your thoughts are not the product of a soul, but the electrochemical fizzing of your brain. The universe is not a divine mystery, but a giant, intricate machine like a cosmic clock. And if you understand the gears and springs of the clock, you can understand everything. There are no ghosts in this machine. Darwin's theory of evolution was the biological cornerstone of this worldview. It provided a purely materialistic explanation for the origin of humanity. We were not sculpted from clay by a divine hand. We were the result of an unimaginably long and unguided process of natural selection. We were, in the starkest terms, a species of highly evolved ape. For the Soviet government, proving this connection was not merely an academic exercise. It was a crucial political act. It was a way to land a decisive, killing blow against the authority of the Church. They needed to do more than just argue against religion. They needed to demonstrate its core story to be a lie, in a way that was spectacular, undeniable, and scientifically irrefutable. This is the moment where the path of Ilya Ivanov, the quiet animal breeder, converged with the grand revolutionary highway of the Soviet state. He proposed an experiment that, to the ideologues in the Kremlin, sounded like a stroke of genius. He would use his unparalleled expertise in artificial insemination to attempt to create a hybrid of a human and a chimpanzee. The political leadership was electrified by the proposal. This creature, this humanzee, would be the ultimate symbol of the new godless age. It would be a living, breathing refutation of the book of Genesis. It would demolish the sacred wall between man and beast. It would be a walking, talking demonstration of materialism, a living monument to the power of Soviet science to reveal the hidden truths of nature. The project was immediately given the highest priority. A powerful official named Nikolai Gorbunov, who was a key figure in the administration of Soviet science, became Ivanov's fervent champion. The Soviet Academy of Sciences, with the full backing of the state, opened its coffers. Ivanov was granted a budget that was simply staggering for the time, a sum equivalent to many millions of dollars today. This was not some secret backroom project. It was a national mission, a source of immense pride, a flagship enterprise of the new civilization they were trying to build. Ivanov's role was transformed overnight. He was no longer a mere biologist. He was now a scientific warrior for the revolution, an agent of the state tasked with a mission of world historical importance. He was being sent to the front lines in the war against idealism and superstition. His journey to Africa was to be a scientific crusade, a quest to bring back the Holy Grail of materialism, a living link between humanity and its animal ancestors. In the spring of 1926, the great expedition began. Ilya Ivanov, his son, and a small, hand-picked team of researchers boarded a steamship in a European port and set a course for the equator. Imagine that voyage. The slow, steady thrum of the ship's engines, a constant mechanical heartbeat, carrying them further from the cold, gray world they knew. Day by day, the sky would change, the quality of the light would shift, the air would grow warmer, thicker, saturated with the unfamiliar tang of the open ocean. For a man born on the vast, flat plains of Russia, this journey into the humid vertical world of the tropics must have been a disorienting and profound experience. Their destination was French Guiana, a colonial territory on the far western coast of Africa. As their ship neared the continent, they would have seen a coastline of breathtaking, almost violent green, a dense, tangled wall of rainforest, a world of life so thick and vibrant it seemed to be a single living entity. When they finally stepped onto the dock, the air would have hit them like a physical thing, a heavy, warm blanket of humidity, thick with the smells of salt, mud, rotting vegetation, and 1,000 unknown blossoms. And the sound would have been a constant, layered symphony. The chatter of monkeys, the calls of exotic birds, the high-pitched electric hum of countless insects. It was into this primordial world, the very cradle of humanity, that Ivanov had come to conduct his futuristic experiment. This was not a swashbuckling adventure into the unknown. It was a highly organized scientific mission. Ivanov had secured the full cooperation of the world-renowned Pasteur Institute in Paris, a symbol of the legitimacy of his endeavor. The French colonial authorities had granted him permission to work at their new primate research facility in the town of Kindia. This is a vital detail. It demonstrates that in the 1920s, Ivanov's project, while certainly ambitious and controversial, was not seen as the work of a madman. He was operating with the blessing of the international scientific establishment. The Kindia station was a tiny island of Western science in an ocean of African wilderness. It was a collection of simple, functional buildings, laboratories with rudimentary equipment, Spartan living quarters, and a series of cages and enclosures for captured animals. It was here, in this remote and isolated setting, that Ivanov planned to orchestrate the first act of his great biological drama. His plan was clinical and straightforward. He would obtain sperm from human donors, and using his well-honed techniques, attempt to impregnate several female chimpanzees. Let us pause here and take a deep, slow breath. And let us contemplate the vast moral distance that separates our time from his. Today, the very concept of this experiment is repugnant. We have learned, through decades of patient research, that chimpanzees are not simple beasts. They are our closest living relatives, possessing complex social lives, deep emotional bonds, and a startling degree of intelligence and self-awareness. To us, the act of capturing them, imprisoning them, and subjecting them to this procedure seems an act of profound and inexcusable cruelty. But the 1920s were a different world. The idea of animal rights was in its infancy. Animals, even apes, were largely viewed through a utilitarian lens, as objects of study, resources to be used for the advancement of human knowledge. This historical context does not forgive Ivanov's actions, but it is essential for understanding the mindset that made them possible. Ivanov and his team began their work. Local hunters were hired to go into the jungle and bring back chimpanzees. The process would have been terrifying for the animals, a nightmare of nets and shouting and capture. Once at the station, they were confined to stark cages. Ivanov selected 3 healthy adult females for the first round of experiments. In the cold, detached language of his scientific notes, they are not individuals. They have no names. They are simply specimens, data points known as chimpanzee number 1, number 2, and number 3. The procedures were then carried out. Sperm was obtained from human donors. The records are vague on who these men were, or if they fully understood the nature of the experiment. With his customary precision, Ivanov performed the inseminations. And then there was nothing to do but wait. The long, hot, humid days at Kindia settled into a period of tense observation. The scientists watched the chimpanzees ceaselessly, monitoring their health, their behavior, looking for any sign, any subtle change that might indicate that the impossible had occurred, that a new and unprecedented form of life was beginning. The weeks stretched into months, but the signs they were looking for never appeared. The experiment was a categorical failure. Not a single one of the chimpanzees conceived. The great biological bridge that Ivanov had traveled halfway around the world to build had failed to even break ground. From his limited pre-genetic perspective, Ivanov could only guess at the reasons for the failure. He was a master of technique, and he likely blamed his tools or his timing. Perhaps the sperm was not viable. Perhaps the hormonal cycles of the chimpanzees were more complex than he had anticipated. He saw it as a mechanical problem, one that could be solved with more data and refined methods. But today, with the benefit of a century of scientific discovery, we know the profound and elegant reason his experiment was always doomed to fail. The barrier was not technical. It was fundamental. It lies deep within the very language of life, in the structure of our chromosomes. Imagine that the complete set of instructions for building a living creature is an encyclopedia. The Human Encyclopedia is written in 46 volumes. The Chimpanzee Encyclopedia is written in 48 volumes. If you were to open any volume from either encyclopedia, the text inside would be strikingly similar, almost identical in many long passages. But the number of volumes is different. Now, for reproduction to occur, the encyclopedia from the father and the encyclopedia from the mother must merge perfectly. Each volume from one must find its corresponding partner from the other. Think of it like a zipper with 23 teeth on one side from the sperm and 23 teeth on the other from the egg. When they are perfectly aligned, they mesh together smoothly, and life can begin. But what happens if you try to zip together a side with 23 teeth and a side with 24 teeth? The zipper will snag instantly. The teeth will not align. The mechanism is fundamentally incompatible. This chromosomal difference is the primary, insurmountable barrier that makes a human-chimpanzee hybrid a biological impossibility. There are other, more subtle barriers as well. An immunological clash, a mismatch of proteins on the cell surfaces. But this is the Great Wall. Ilya Ivanov, a man working in the twilight years before the dawn of modern genetics, was trying to pick a lock without knowing that he had the wrong number of keys. Disappointed by the results, but with his core belief unshaken, Ivanov eventually packed up his equipment and prepared for the long journey home. His African expedition had been a failure, but in his methodical mind, it was simply the first in a series of experiments. He had not disproven his hypothesis. He had merely eliminated one variable. He concluded, with a chilling kind of logic, that the problem might lie with the female chimpanzee's reproductive system. Therefore, the next logical step was to reverse the equation. He would return to the Soviet Union not in defeat, but with a new and even more disturbing plan. He would bring the male apes back with him, and this time he would find human women to carry the experiment to its conclusion. The most forbidden phase of the experiment was about to begin. Ivanov's return to Moscow was not met with disappointment or censure. The Soviet state's appetite for his project remained as strong as ever. The failure in Guinea was brushed aside as a mere technical hurdle, a problem that Soviet science, with its superior ideological clarity, was destined to solve. Ivanov presented his new plan to his patrons, the reverse experiment. He argued that the human female reproductive system might be more adaptable, and that inseminating women with ape sperm was the logical next step in his research protocol. His proposal was approved without hesitation. A new headquarters for the project was established at a primate research institute in the city of Sukhumi. This choice of location is layered with a kind of dark, cinematic irony. Sukhumi, on the lush subtropical coast of the Black Sea, in what is now Georgia, was the Soviet Union's premier health resort. It was the Soviet equivalent of the French Riviera, a place of stunning natural beauty, with palm trees, verdant hills, and elegant sanatoriums where workers from across the nation came to rest, heal, and recover their strength. It was a paradise dedicated to well-being. And it was in this haven of tranquility that Ivanov planned to conduct the most disquieting experiment in modern history. The Primate Institute at Sukhumi was expanded. New apes, including several chimpanzees and a large, mature orangutan named Tarzan, were acquired for the project. The laboratories were outfitted with the latest equipment. The scientific stage was set. All that was missing were the human actors. Ivanov required human female volunteers. The question echoes through the decades, a cold and persistent whisper. Who on earth would volunteer for such a procedure? It seems to us an almost unimaginable choice, but to understand it, we must try, for a moment, to step into the fervent, all-encompassing ideological climate of the late 1920s Soviet Union. This was a time of immense social upheaval and messianic belief in the communist project. The goal was not just to build a new economy, but to build a new reality, to forge a new type of human. Science was the state religion, and scientists were its prophets. For a truly dedicated communist woman, the opportunity to participate in a groundbreaking experiment, to offer her own body, to prove a fundamental truth of materialism, and help shatter the chains of religious superstition, could have been seen as the ultimate act of revolutionary sacrifice. It would be a contribution to the cause far greater than working in a factory or on a collective farm. Ivanov began his recruitment process, discreetly at first, through letters and contacts within the Communist Party. To the surprise of many, he found willing participants. The fragmented, declassified records from the Soviet archives indicate that at least 5 women formally volunteered for the insemination procedure. Their stories are a heartbreaking void in the historical record. Their names are gone, their faces lost, their motivations a subject of dark speculation. Were they zealous idealists? Were they desperate women from impoverished backgrounds, lured by promises of financial support or better housing? Was there an element of unspoken coercion, a pressure to demonstrate their loyalty in a climate of growing paranoia? We will never know. They remain silent, ghostly figures at the very center of this disturbing drama. However, Ivanov's plan was not proceeding without friction. While the political commissars and party officials were enthusiastic, a growing sense of unease was spreading through the professional medical community. Even within the tightly controlled Soviet system, doctors and biologists began to raise serious ethical and practical objections. They wrote cautious letters to scientific committees, expressing grave concerns. They worried about the profound and unknown physical risks to the women. They questioned the potential for transmitting unknown diseases from ape to human. And they grappled with the terrifying philosophical questions. If a hybrid child were born, what would it be? Would it be a person with legal rights? A scientific specimen? A monster? How could any society, even a revolutionary one, possibly care for such a creature? The project, once a source of national pride, was starting to become a source of quiet, fearful controversy. Despite these growing concerns, the preparations at the idyllic Sukhumi Institute pressed forward. The labs were sterile and ready. The volunteers were, presumably, waiting for the call. The scientific team was in place. The final critical piece of the puzzle was the genetic material from the chosen male donor, the orangutan Tarzan. The moment of truth, the point of no return, was imminent. And then, just as the project teetered on the very edge of reality, the unpredictable, indifferent hand of biology intervened. Before a single human volunteer could be brought to the laboratory, before any insemination procedure could be performed, Tarzan the orangutan, the linchpin of the entire experiment, fell ill. His condition worsened quickly, and a short time later, he died from a brain hemorrhage. His death brought the entire multi-million-dollar state-sponsored project to an abrupt and complete halt. Acquiring a new sexually mature and healthy male-grade ape and acclimatizing it to the conditions in Sukhumi would be a long and arduous process, taking many months, if not more than a year. This unforeseen delay, this simple random act of nature, proved to be the project's salvation and Ivanov's doom. Because in the months that Ivanov and his team would have spent waiting for a new animal, the political climate in the Soviet Union was about to descend into a maelstrom of terror and death. The brief pause in the experiment, occasioned by the death of a single ape in a cage, was just long enough for Stalin's Great Purge to begin. A political hurricane that would sweep away Ilya Ivanov and his forbidden science forever. The early 1930s in the Soviet Union were a time of escalating paranoia and terror. Joseph Stalin, in his quest for absolute, unquestioned power, initiated a brutal campaign of repression against anyone he perceived as a threat. This campaign, which would become known as the Great Purge, was a meat grinder that consumed millions of lives. It was not based on guilt or innocence, but on suspicion, quotas, and the settling of old scores. A careless remark, a foreign acquaintance, or the denunciation of a jealous colleague was all it took. The secret police, the NKVD, would come in the night. Arrest would be followed by a sham trial, and then either a bullet in a basement or a long, slow death in the frozen labor camps of the Gulag. Science, once lauded as the engine of Soviet progress, became a field of terror like any other. Stalin demanded that science, like art and literature, serve the state and conform to his political ideology. This led to one of the most bizarre and tragic chapters in the history of science, the rise of Trofim Lysenko. Lysenko was an agronomist who rejected mainstream genetics and the work of Gregor Mendel. He promoted a fraudulent theory of inheritance that suited Stalin's political goals. As Lysenko's power grew, legitimate scientists who defended real genetics were branded as enemies of the people. They were hounded from their positions, arrested, and imprisoned. The pursuit of scientific truth became a life-threatening occupation. This was the treacherous new landscape in which Ilya Ivanov found himself stranded. His ambitious project, once the darling of the revolution, was now a dangerous liability. His international connections, particularly his work with the French, were now seen as evidence of spying. His failure to produce a hybrid in Africa was reinterpreted as possible sabotage, a deliberate act of wrecking a vital state project. The very nature of his work, which involved challenging the boundaries of nature, suddenly seemed suspicious, bourgeois, and out of step with the new, rigid orthodoxy. His high-level patrons, the very men who had championed and funded his work, were themselves caught in the gears of the purge, stripped of their power and fighting for their lives. The funding for the Sukhumi Institute vanished. The official support evaporated. Ivanov, a celebrated scientist, was left isolated, a relic of a more experimental and open-minded era, a perfect target for the paranoid new regime. In December of 1930, the inevitable knock on the door came. Ilya Ivanov was arrested by the secret police. The charges filed against him had nothing to do with the monstrous experiment he was planning. He was not accused of unethical human experimentation or cruelty to animals. He was charged with the standard, fabricated political crimes of the era, being the leader of a counter-revolutionary organization and engaging in anti-Soviet activities. His life's work, his profound and strange ambition, was twisted into a political weapon to be used against him. Following a brief, closed trial, he was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years of exile. He was stripped of his titles, his laboratory, and his life's work, and banished to the remote city of Alma-Ata in Kazakhstan. It was a sentence of civic death, a complete erasure from the scientific world he had once dominated. All of his research papers, his detailed notes from Africa and Sukhumi, and crucially, the confidential files on the 5 female volunteers were seized by the NKVD. They were classified as state secrets and buried in the deep, inaccessible archives of the secret police, their story condemned to silence. Ilya Ivanov would not live to see the end of his sentence. The shock of his fall from grace, the public humiliation, and the brutal reality of exile shattered his health. Just over a year after his arrest, in March of 1932, he died of a stroke, a broken and forgotten man. A terse, formal obituary was published, briefly mentioning his early, praiseworthy contributions to Soviet livestock breeding. There was no mention of his life's great, obsessive project. The entire affair, the expedition to Africa, the lab in Sukhumi, the human volunteers, the dream of the humanzee, was wiped from the official record as if it had never happened. For more than 60 years, the story remained buried. It survived only as a faint, half-believed rumor among a few elderly scientists in Russia. The silence imposed by the state was total. It was not until the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s that the archives began to creak open. A new generation of historians and journalists, digging through mountains of declassified files, began to find the astonishing documents. Ivanov's original proposal, his reports from Guinea, memos from the Kremlin approving the project. Slowly, painstakingly, the incredible, unbelievable story was pieced together and brought out into the light. But the story that emerged was full of holes, of missing pages and silenced voices. Because of the purges, the deliberate destruction of records, and the simple passage of time, we are left with an incomplete and haunting narrative. The identities of the 5 women who volunteered are almost certainly lost forever. The full extent of the preparations in Sukhumi, and whether any preliminary procedures were ever attempted, remains shrouded in mystery. The truth of what happened was so effectively suppressed that we can now only see its fragmented shadow. What, then, is the legacy of this strange and chilling tale, rescued from the dustbin of history? It serves as one of the most potent cautionary tales in the annals of science. It is a story about the terrifying dangers of science when it is completely untethered from a foundation of ethics and human compassion. Ivanov's genuine, if obsessive, scientific curiosity was hijacked and weaponized by a totalitarian ideology that saw all living things, both human and animal, as nothing more than instruments for achieving its political ends. The story also holds up a mirror to our own time, reflecting how profoundly our understanding of the natural world and our place in it has evolved. In Ivanov's era, a chimpanzee was a thing, a specimen, a biological machine to be experimented upon. Today, our perspective has been fundamentally transformed, largely due to the patient, empathetic work of pioneering scientists like Jane Goodall. Let us close our eyes for a moment and picture her work. A young woman sitting quietly in the shade of a tree in the Gombe forest of Tanzania. For months, for years, she just watched. She did not capture or experiment. She observed. And in doing so, she opened a window into a world no one had ever truly seen. She saw chimpanzees using tools, fashioning sticks to fish for termites. She witnessed their complex political lives, their alliances, and their rivalries. She saw them mourn their dead, and she saw them wage war. She gave them names, not numbers, recognizing them as individuals with unique personalities. Her work, and the work of others who followed, taught humanity to see the glimmer of a recognizable consciousness, a kindred mind, looking back at us from the eyes of the great apes. Today, Ivanov's experiment feels monstrous, not just because it is an affront to human dignity, but because it is an affront to the dignity of the chimpanzees themselves. And finally, in the ultimate failure of this forbidden experiment, there is a kind of deep and quiet reassurance. Ivanov's grand project was doomed from the start, not by political intrigue or by a stroke of bad luck, but by the beautiful, intricate, and unyielding laws of biology itself. That simple, elegant difference in the number of chromosomes stands as a silent guardian, a natural law that ensures the integrity and uniqueness of each species. The branches of the tree of life may grow close, their leaves may touch, but their roots remain distinct. The universe, it seems, has a wisdom that is deeper and more resilient than our most audacious and misguided ambitions. The story of Ilya Ivanov is a shadow, a strange footnote in the history of science. It is a tale of a brilliant mind, a terrifying time, and a profound overreaching of human ambition. It serves as a permanent reminder that knowledge without wisdom is a perilous thing, and that the pursuit of progress must always be guided by a humble respect for the profound mysteries and the sacred boundaries of the living world. As this story now comes to its end, let the unsettling thoughts drift away, and let them be replaced by a sense of peace. The experiment failed. The line was never crossed. The natural world held its ground. And as you now allow yourself to drift completely into a deep and restful sleep, you can picture the great, green, breathing forests of the world, where our closest relatives live out their lives in peace, forever free from such strange and troubling human dreams. Let the gentle rhythm of your own breathing be the only sound you hear as you sink into a calm and restorative rest.